Hey folks, in this week's video, I'm going to talk about three things. The first and the core of it's going to be what my motivation for leaving the oil industry and kind of what the main reasons and drivers were. Secondly, I'll talk about the framework that my wife and I used to make the decision. At the time, it was a very difficult decision. In hindsight, it may seem like inevitable or the right thing to do, but at the time, it was a very tough decision for my wife and I to make. And then the last one, which is tied to that, is how do we make the commitment to each other? We flopped on this decision over many, many months. And finally, we kind of came to a head and decided to make a commitment to each other. And I'll talk more specifically about that at the end of the video. Before we get into it, I'd love to share a brief story that, I know what it's like to be in your shoes. I know what it's like to work in a job or a company or industry that you're not compelled by. And I distinctly remember in 2013 or 2014 when I stumbled upon Elon's TED Talk where he talked about SpaceX and Tesla, and it really compelled me. And I was like, I remember saying to my wife and a few of the colleagues I work closely with to say, like, why can't I work at a company like this? But never in a million years did I think, in a couple of years from then, I'd actually be sitting across a boardroom table from Elon and working on the Model 3, working for Tesla on some of the most exciting projects, at least in my opinion, in the world. So thanks again for watching. I look forward to sharing more stories like this in the near future. Let's get into it. It's been an interesting exercise about 5 years later to sit down and look and reflect on why I actually decided to leave the industry. The first one for me was I think I'd really lost a sense of purpose. And so it wasn't always like that when I worked for Exxon or worked in the oil industry. I came out of school, very excited to take on the world as many new graduates do. I got a great job with a great company. Exxon was at the time the biggest company in the world, had a global footprint and a lot of exciting training material and opportunities around the world. And that was a really compelling opportunity for me. I also was working in my home province on kind of the biggest project that the province had at the time called Hibernia. And I remember having a very closely knit sense of purpose that, the work I was doing was really impacting the local economy. It was having an impact on jobs and even revenue for the local economy. And that meant a lot to me. And I was also growing as an individual and, growing a lot, especially early on in my career. A few years later, I actually moved to Houston, as part of an expat assignment, which was very exciting. It was good financially. It was good from an exposure standpoint for the company. It also exposed us to a new country. We got to live in the US for the first time. But I think, as soon as I moved to the US as part of the headquarters, especially with Exxon, you're a very small cog in a very big wheel. And I think as soon as I moved, I started to lose that sense of purpose. The second reason I alluded to in the opening, actually, in that I was really compelled to Silicon Valley, and that I loved Steve Jobs and was obsessed with him, especially through the the very innovative years of the iPhone, iPad. Those kind of things were something I was very passionate about. And then as I learned about Elon in 2013, 2014, I was like, man, this is a company that's maybe not software based, that I have experience that I can actually add value to. And so I was really compelled to be a part of those organizations and to be a part of Silicon Valley and the dynamism around innovation there. The next reason was around global opportunities, that they started to dry up in 2016 or 2015 when the oil price took its last dip in that period of time. And we were really excited about potentially moving to the Middle East or overseas somewhere with Exxon, and those opportunities kind of quickly dried up. And we were at a stage in our career and lives, it was before we had kids, and it was a great opportunity for us to kind of explore the world, and we didn't want to put that on hold for 5 years or however long it took for us to get that exposure and opportunity again. And so we said, this is a time in our lives where we can take a risk and do something different, and that's what we decided to do. The last reason was really around climate change, and that at the time there seemed to be a global consensus around the impact that climate change was going to have on the world, but I saw very little movement from Exxon and most of the other oil companies. I'm really grateful that more of the companies and even the capital markets are starting to take this more seriously now, but at the time I didn't see a lot of that movement. And Tesla seemed like the only company that was really taking it on that could have a full global impact. It was taking on both sides of the energy equation, with kind of consumption through transportation as well as generation through kind of solar and battery storage. And so that combination was really what compelled me to make a change. So next I want to share the framework that my wife and I used to make the decision. We didn't look at it just from the perspective of how this move would affect our careers, but we tried to look at what we thought were the 5 most important aspects of our life. We actually sat on a park bench in Houston, Texas, and did this exercise. And this is actually the book we used to do it. So we looked at these 5 areas. The first one being relationship with each other and kind of other relationships in our lives. We looked at the work aspect, how the meaning in our work, challenge, and growth opportunities would be. We looked at the sense of adventure that we get from moving to the Bay Area or to California in general, and then the lifestyle that offered to us and to our maybe future family. We certainly also looked at the security aspect, kind of financially, as well as kind of from a career standpoint. And we sat down along these 5 categories and graded each of them. I don't know if it's a perfect assessment tool, but we actually scored 3 of them to be a net benefit. 2 were kind of neutral, and 1 was arguably worse. But it was a helpful mechanism when we left that day to say, this seems like the right thing to do. And that was our decision going forward. So I actually lied in the last section that, we left that meeting in the park that day and we're kind of made the final decision. For weeks and then really months, we went back and forth saying, we shouldn't do it. We should kind of stick around and stick it out. And we went back and forth until I came home one day and my wife had drawn up a contract. And I'll share it here. I'll read through it. In hindsight, in some ways it seems crazy, but once we signed that contract and the wording in it, it really did solidify it. And then it's interesting, once you make that commitment to yourself and to each other, we started to make a bunch of decisions and we started to plan towards resigning. We decided to take some time off. We started planning what that time would look like and looking forward to it. We planned movers. We started to sell our cars and to make plans. And once that final commitment was made, it really helped. And then once you get to the day of quitting and kind of moving on, it made it much more manageable. Because all those actions, it took us 2 or 3 months to get most of those things in motion. But the contract was that moment where we finally committed and started to take those actions to move in that direction. So the video really begs the question, was this the right decision for me? And the answer for me is yes, for several reasons. The first being Silicon Valley feels like the right place for us. My wife and I have decided to settle here. For the lifestyle that it offers is really amazing. The weather's great. There's a lot to do in this area, but also the amount of opportunity and optimism here is quite infectious, and we're excited to continue to explore that for the years to come. Secondly, I really feel like I've got a renewed sense of purpose. I think working at Tesla on that mission and meeting a lot of other people even outside the company that have similar kind of values and drives in this area is something that I find really compelling and grateful to have that renewed sense. I think lastly, why is the right decision for me? It's really helped push me to get more comfortable taking risks, or more importantly, kind of facing uncertainty, especially over longer periods of time. I never saw myself as a person that kind of took big risks or chances, but I think incrementally over time, I've started taking more risks, kind of moving to Houston, then leaving the oil industry, coming to Tesla, then leaving Tesla. Each of those kind of have an incremental amount of uncertainty around it. And I think getting more comfortable with that has been important for kind of opening additional doors for me. For you, it's worth thinking about, what level of uncertainty are you willing to face? There is a big opportunity where uncertainty kind of lies, especially over extended periods of time. And because most people don't want it. Most people want certainty in the near term or even long term, and that they're willing to pay a big price for that. I genuinely want to say thanks again for watching. If you've got comments or feedback, leave them below. And I look forward to sharing more stories like this in the near future. We'll see you next week.